A dense fog lay over the Amazon rainforest, blanketing the world in a murky stillness that even the most fearless of predators hesitated to break. But for the aliens of the Othran Dominion, Earth's wilds were no more than a curiosity, a minor hurdle to be cleared in their conquest of the planet. They moved with arrogance, their exocets slicing through the underbrush as they surveyed their new territory. Commander Zathrek, his crystalline armor reflecting the dim, filtered sunlight, strode ahead of his squad. He scanned the towering trees and dense foliage, his mind already strategizing the best ways to exploit this environment. Behind him, Lieutenant Virex hesitated, eyes narrowing at the sudden, eerie silence that had fallen over the jungle. "Strange," Virex murmured, glancing around. "The wildlife has gone quiet." Zathrek barely paused. "They sense our presence and know better than to challenge us," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This planet's creatures are primitive and weak, Lieutenant. We have nothing to fear from them." Virex frowned but nodded, falling in line. His superior's confidence was unshakable, but something gnawed at his instincts. For weeks now, they had moved unopposed, their advanced technology rendering Earth's defenses meaningless. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something vital. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, the dense canopy overhead thickened, swallowing the sunlight and plunging them into an almost surreal twilight. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of rich soil and decaying plant life overwhelming even their advanced sensory equipment. Strange calls echoed in the distance, and the undergrowth rustled with unseen movement. Their forward base, nestled in a small clearing, was a stark contrast to the chaotic beauty of the jungle. Smooth metallic structures gleamed under artificial lights, and drones flitted through the air, constructing additional barriers and fortifications. The aliens had already begun their systematic analysis of the area, capturing and cataloging various species. Zathrek glanced at a tranquilized jaguar being hoisted into a containment unit. "Pathetic creatures," he muttered. "We'll have this planet under our control within months." But even as he spoke, a subtle movement caught Virex's eye. He turned, his gaze falling on a trail of bullet ants, their black forms barely visible against the dark soil. They moved with an unnerving precision, streaming out from the disturbed earth near one of their landing crafts. "Commander," Virex called out, a hint of urgency in his voice. "The local insect life, it's converging on our equipment." Zathrek glanced over dismissively. "Insects? This is your concern? We've faced planetary defenses, entire fleets, and you worry about bugs? These are no ordinary insects, sir," Virex insisted. "Bullet ants, among the most dangerous on this planet. Their stings are said to cause unbearable pain." Zathrek's laugh was harsh, almost mocking. "Let them try. Our armor is impervious to such primitive threats." But Virex wasn't convinced. The ants were acting strangely, swarming over the legs of the base, moving with a purpose that suggested more than mindless aggression. He activated his helmet's communicator, relaying orders to the engineering teams to seal off any openings. Minutes later, chaos erupted. It started with a few strangled cries over the comms, garbled messages about breaches and biohazards. Then came the alarms, blaring through the base, echoing off the metallic walls as the soldiers scrambled to contain the unthinkable. The ants, undeterred by the sleek alien metal, had found their way inside, exploiting the smallest gaps and weaknesses. Within moments, the base was a battlefield. Soldiers, trained for interstellar warfare, were stumbling, writhing in agony as the ants swarmed over them, their powerful stings piercing the gaps in the exosets. The venom, potent and relentless, overwhelmed even the advanced neural dampeners of their suits. Virex watched in horror as one of his men collapsed, convulsing, his body riddled with the tiny invaders. Zathrek, his earlier confidence shattered, was barking orders, his voice a mixture of rage and disbelief. "How is this happening?" he roared, swatting at the ants crawling up his armor. "They're insects. Our technology should. Our technology is useless!" Virex shouted back, slapping at the ants that were already inside his suit, the pain searing through his body like molten fire. "We didn't account for this. We underestimated them. A wave of ants surged forward, as if sensing their enemy's desperation. They infiltrated the central command, their sheer numbers overwhelming the automated defenses. Panels sparked, lights flickered, and the base's once sterile corridors became a nightmarish scene of confusion and agony. Zathrek, his face contorted in pain, struggled to his feet. We need to retreat. Fall back to the ships. He stumbled, clutching at Vyrex's arm for support. Retreat? We're supposed to be the conquerors. Vyrex snapped, his voice strained but steady. He hauled Zathrek upright, glancing around at the disarray. But you're right. We have no choice. If we stay, we'll be overrun. They fought their way through the swarming ants, every step a battle against the searing pain that threatened to drop them to their knees. Soldiers who could still move followed, their once imposing figures now bent and staggering. They reached the landing crafts, a battered, bleeding remnant of what had been a formidable force. As the ships lifted off, the jungle below seemed to pulse with life, the victorious bullet ants reclaiming their territory. From the air, the sprawling rainforest stretched out endlessly, a living, breathing entity that had repelled its invaders without firing a single shot. In the silence of the ascending craft, Vyrex glanced at Zathrek, who was slumped in his seat, his once bright eyes now dull and haunted. We underestimated them, Vyrex said quietly. Not just the humans, but everything on this planet. We'll need to rethink our approach. Zathrek nodded slowly, his voice a ragged whisper. Yes. We'll need to respect it. The ship disappeared into the thick cloud cover, leaving the jungle below unbroken and undeterred, a place where even the smallest creatures could bring mighty invaders to their knees. The air inside the command ship was thick with tension. Despite the advanced filtration systems, the scent of burnt circuits, and the acrid tang of alien blood still lingered, a harsh reminder of the chaos they had barely escaped. Commander Zathrek stood hunched over the central holotable, his face a mask of grim determination. Around him, his officers were subdued, their usual chatter replaced by a heavy, unnerving silence. We were unprepared, Zathrek began, his voice low but carrying a dangerous edge. I underestimated this planet's defenses. It's a mistake we won't make again. Lieutenant Vyrex stood opposite him, arms crossed. His usually calm demeanor was strained, eyes darting to the security feeds showing the desolate base they had abandoned. Ants still swarmed the wreckage, undeterred by the destruction they had caused. He drew a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. It wasn't just the ants, Commander. Our assumptions were flawed from the start. We thought our technology could overpower anything, but Earth's ecosystems are more complex than we gave them credit for. Zathrek's gaze shifted to Vyrex, his eyes narrowing. Are you suggesting that we were outmatched by insects? Vyrex held his ground, unflinching. I'm suggesting we need to rethink our approach. We underestimated not just the humans but the entire biosphere. It's interconnected, resilient. We need to adapt or this mission will fail. A tense silence followed. The other officers shifted uneasily, glancing between their commander and Vyrex. Zathrek clenched his jaw, his pride battling with the cold logic of Vyrex's words. After a moment, he exhaled sharply, the sound filled with reluctant acceptance. Fine, he said curtly. What do you propose? Vyrex relaxed slightly, his mind racing through potential strategies. We need to conduct a more thorough reconnaissance. Analyze the interactions within these ecosystems, learn their weaknesses. And most importantly, we can't disrupt the environment blindly. Every action must be calculated, precise. Zathrek nodded, though a flicker of annoyance still lingered in his expression. And what of the humans? They'll see our retreat as a victory, emboldening them. We need to use that, Vyrex said, a hint of a smile forming. Lure them into overextending, make them think they have the upper hand. Meanwhile, we gather the data we need to strike decisively. Zathrek considered this, then turned to the rest of his officers. Begin preparations for a full-scale surveillance operation. I want every square inch of that jungle mapped and analyzed. No more surprises. As the officers moved to carry out his orders, Vyrex remained, his mind still racing. Something about the ants' attack gnawed at him. It wasn't just the sheer ferocity, it was the coordination, the precision of their assault. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this planet's defense than simple animal instinct. Lieutenant, Zathrak's voice broke through his thoughts. Is there something else? Virex hesitated, then nodded slowly. We've been assuming that the humans are the primary intelligence on this planet. But what if there's something else? Some other form of coordination or consciousness? Zathrak raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting the ants are intelligent? Not in the way we understand intelligence, Virex clarified quickly. But their behavior was too organized, too strategic. If there's something guiding them, something we haven't accounted for, it could pose a far greater threat than we realize. Zathrak's eyes narrowed, his mind turning over this new possibility. If you're right, we're facing an enemy we know nothing about. One that's not bound by the limitations we're used to. Virex nodded. Which is why we need to be careful. No more underestimating this planet. We need to be methodical, precise. Find out what we're truly up against. Zathrak studied Virex for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed. We proceed with caution. But make no mistake, we will conquer this world. We'll just need to be smarter about it. Virex inclined his head, but the unease in his chest didn't dissipate. There was something about Earth, something elusive and dangerous, that defied all their expectations. He just hoped they would figure it out before it was too late. Hours later, the command ship's sensors buzzed with activity as they began their reconnaissance. Drones zipped through the jungle, their sleek forms weaving through the dense canopy, scanning every inch of the terrain. Streams of data flooded the holotable, intricate maps of the rainforest unfolding in real time. Virex watched as the images flickered across the screen. There was no sign of human activity in the area, just the relentless, teeming life of the jungle. But even through the layers of data, he sensed a pattern, a subtle, almost imperceptible order to the chaos. Commander, one of the officers called out, his voice tense. We're picking up unusual activity near the abandoned base. Movement patterns suggest a large-scale gathering, but it's not human. Zathrak's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. On screen. The holotable shifted, displaying a view of the ruined base. The ants were no longer scattered. They moved in tight, coordinated lines, converging on a central point. In the middle of the swarming mass, something glowed, a strange, pulsating light emanating from the ground. What is that? Virex whispered, leaning closer. The light was unlike anything he'd seen before, its pulse almost hypnotic. Zathrak's expression hardened. We need to know what we're dealing with. Prepare a scout team. I want that anomaly investigated. Virex's heart pounded as he watched the screen. Whatever that light was, it was something new, something they hadn't accounted for. He could feel it, a presence, a force lurking just beneath the surface, biding its time. As the team geared up for the mission, Virex's unease only grew. The jungle was no longer just a battlefield. It was an entity unto itself, an inscrutable opponent that defied their understanding. And as they moved toward the unknown, he couldn't shake the sense that they were walking into a trap. But there was no turning back now. With each passing moment, the tension built, an invisible thread winding tighter and tighter. Whatever awaited them in the depths of the jungle, they would face it head-on. The drones continued their sweep, their silent hum a stark contrast to the foreboding silence that had settled over the ship. Virex took one last look at the pulsating light on the screen, then turned, his resolve hardening. They had come to conquer this planet. But first, they would have to survive it. The jungle loomed ominously as the scout team approached the abandoned base. The dense foliage pressed in on all sides, every leaf and branch seeming to pulse with an unseen, hostile energy. Lieutenant Virex led the small unit, his eyes scanning the shadows, senses heightened. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what they might uncover. Keep your eyes open, Virex murmured into his calm. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that his team didn't miss. They moved in silence, their sleek exosuits blending seamlessly with the dappled light filtering through the canopy. The base, once a symbol of their technological might, was now a twisted wreck. Metal beams jutted out at odd angles, and shattered equipment lay scattered like discarded toys. But it wasn't the destruction that made Virex's stomach churn, it was the silence. The base, once buzzing with activity, was now eerily quiet, the usual drone of insects and calls of distant animals absent. "Commander, we're at the perimeter," Virex reported, his eyes locked on the strange glow emanating from the center of the wreckage. "No sign of hostiles, but there's something different. Proceed with caution, Lieutenant." Zathrex's voice crackled over the calm. "We need to know what that light is. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary." Virex acknowledged the order with a slight nod. He signaled his team forward, moving cautiously through the debris. Every step felt like a risk, each sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. The glow grew brighter as they neared, a pulsating light that seemed to beckon them closer, its rhythm almost hypnotic. "Whatever it is, it's right at the center," whispered one of the scouts, her voice tense. "I'm getting strange readings, energy levels are fluctuating, but there's no clear source." Virex's jaw tightened. "Stay alert. We don't know what we're dealing with." He took a deep breath, forcing his pulse to steady as he stepped into the heart of the ruined base. The scene before him defied explanation. The ants that had ravaged their outposts were now gathered around a large, crystalline structure, their movements coordinated and deliberate. The crystal, partially embedded in the ground, glowed with an unearthly light, its surface etched with complex patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer as he watched. "What is that?" one of the scouts breathed, her voice laced with awe and fear. Virex shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but it's not natural. It looks manufactured." He activated his suit's scanner, aiming it at the crystal, but the data it returned made no sense. The readings were erratic, as if the crystal were both organic and technological, pulsing with a form of energy that defied classification. "Commander, we've found the source," Virex said, his voice steady despite the confusion roiling inside him. "It's some kind of crystal, and the ants—" A sudden, sharp click echoed through the clearing, cutting him off. The ants, as one, turned their attention to the intruders. Their movements were synchronized, precise, like soldiers awaiting orders. Virex's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. They weren't just reacting, they were being controlled. "We're not alone," Virex whispered, his hand tightening around his weapon. "There's something guiding them, something using them." Before he could give the order to fall back, the crystal flared, its light intensifying. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through their suits, setting their teeth on edge. The ants surged forward, a black tide of venom and fury, their relentless advance driven by an unseen will. "Defensive positions!" Virex shouted, his voice breaking the spell of shock that had gripped his team. They moved with practiced precision, forming a tight circle, weapons raised. The first wave of ants hit their shields, the impact like 1,000 hammers striking at once. Virex fired, his plasma rifle cutting through the swarm, but the ants kept coming. His team's weapons blazed, the air filled with the harsh flight of energy blasts and the acrid smell of scorched exoskeletons. But for every ant they killed, a dozen more took its place, the swarm unending, relentless. "We can't hold them," one of the scouts yelled, her voice high with panic. "There's too many." Virex gritted his teeth, his mind racing. The crystal was the key, it had to be. If they could destroy it, maybe they could break whatever force was controlling the ants. But it was a desperate gamble, and they were running out of time. "Cover me!" he ordered, breaking from the defensive line. He sprinted toward the crystal, his heart hammering in his chest. The ants surged around him, their bodies slamming against his armor, stingers flashing like daggers. He ignored the pain, the searing heat of the venom as it seeped through the cracks in his suit. He reached the crystal, his vision blurring with sweat and pain. Raising his rifle, he fired point-blank, the blast reverberating through the clearing. The crystal cracked, a high-pitched keening filling the air as the light within flickered. For a moment, the ants faltered, their movements jerky, uncertain. Virex seized the opportunity, firing again and again, each shot sending cracks spidering across the crystal's surface. The light dimmed, the hum growing weaker, but still, the ants fought on. Come on, come on! Virex shouted, his voice raw. He fired one last shot, and the crystal shattered, fragments exploding outward in a shower of light and sound. The ants froze, their bodies twitching as if caught in an invisible grip. Then, as one, they collapsed, the life draining from their forms, leaving the clearing eerily silent once more. Virex staggered back, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The remains of the crystal lay scattered at his feet, its power extinguished. He glanced around, his team battered but alive, the relief in their eyes mirrored in his own. "Commander, the crystal's destroyed," he said, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "The ants are down." Zathrex's voice crackled over the calm, filled with a mix of relief and pride. "Well done, Lieutenant. Return to base. We need to analyze what we've found." Virex nodded, glancing once more at the shattered remains of the crystal. They had won this battle, but he knew it was just the beginning. Whatever force was behind this, it was far more dangerous than they had imagined. As the team made their way back through the jungle, Virex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest, once a silent enemy, now felt alive with intent, as if it were waiting for the next move. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the path ahead. They had faced the unknown and survived, but the war for Earth was far from over. The command center buzzed with tension as the data from the shattered crystal was displayed across the main hollow table. Charts and symbols, alien to even the most advanced Othran technology, pulsed rhythmically, forming patterns and sequences that defied easy interpretation. Commander Zathrex stood at the center, his expression a mix of fascination and frustration. "This isn't just a natural formation," he muttered, leaning closer to the flickering display. "It's a communication node, a relay of some kind." Lieutenant Virex, still recovering from the earlier mission, stepped up beside him, his eyes scanning the shifting symbols. "A relay for what, sir?" Zathrex's gaze remained fixed on the screen. "We're not sure. Our analysts believe it's transmitting signals, complex, encoded bursts of information. It could be coordinating the local wildlife, directing them against us." Virex felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "If that's true, then whatever is sending those signals is far more advanced than we anticipated. And it's using this planet's creatures as its army." Zathrex nodded, his face darkening. "Exactly. We came here expecting resistance from the humans, but this is something different. We're dealing with an intelligence that understands the planet's ecosystems better than we ever could." The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. The jungle wasn't just fighting back, it was being guided, its vast network of life harnessed against them. Virex clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had been outmaneuvered, outthought, by an enemy they couldn't even see. "We need to find the source," Virex said finally, his voice steady. "If we can locate whatever's sending these signals, we can shut it down. Take away its control." Zathrex turned to him, a sharp glint in his eyes. "Agreed. But this isn't a search and destroy mission, Lieutenant. We need to capture it intact. If we can understand how it works, we can use it to turn the tide in our favor." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered officers. The thought of harnessing such a powerful weapon was intoxicating, a chance to finally gain the upper hand in this frustrating campaign. But Virex felt a flicker of unease. They were playing a dangerous game, one where the stakes were higher than they realized. "Sir, if we go after this thing, we need to be prepared," Virex cautioned. "We've seen what it can do. We can't afford to underestimate it again." Zathrex's expression hardened. "Understood. I'm putting you in charge of this operation, Lieutenant. Choose your team and equipment. I want you on the ground within the hour." Virex nodded sharply, already forming a plan in his mind. "I'll take a small unit, minimal footprint. We'll need stealth and precision. If this thing is as advanced as we think, it'll sense us coming." Zathrex clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Bring it back, Virex. Our victory depends on it." The lieutenant saluted and turned, striding from the command center, his mind racing. He selected his team carefully, veterans all, soldiers who had faced the worst Earth could throw at them and survived. They geared up in silence, their movements efficient, methodical. Each one knew the stakes, understood the risks. "Ready, sir," one of the soldiers, a burly fighter named Jorek, said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "What's the plan?" Virex glanced at the map displayed on his wrist unit. "We're heading to the deepest part of the jungle here," he said, pointing to a remote area marked with swirling energy signatures. "That's where the signals are coming from. We go in, secure the source, and extract it. No unnecessary engagements. Keep it quiet, keep it clean." Jorek grunted in acknowledgement. "Understood. What's the extraction plan?" "Aerial pickup once we have the target. We'll mark the LZ and hold position until they can pull us out," Virex replied, his tone crisp. "Stay alert. This thing's been watching us, don't give it any reason to know we're coming." The team nodded, their faces set. They moved out, slipping into the dense underbrush, their black armor blending seamlessly with the shadows. The jungle, so hostile and alien before, now seemed almost watchful, as if it sensed the hunters closing in on their prey. They moved in silence, the only sounds the soft rustle of leaves underfoot and the distant calls of unseen creatures. The air was thick with moisture, each breath heavy with the scent of damp earth and growing things. Every shadow seemed to shift, every breeze a whispered warning. Virex led them forward, his senses sharp, every nerve alert. The coordinates drew them deeper into the wilderness, past twisted trees and dense vines, the terrain growing more treacherous with each step. He glanced at his scanner, noting the increasing energy readings. "We're close," he murmured, signaling the team to spread out. "Stay sharp." They advanced cautiously, weapons at the ready. The air grew cooler, a faint hum vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Virex's pulse quickened. Whatever was ahead, it wasn't natural. They crested a ridge and stopped, eyes widening at the sight below. A vast clearing lay before them, dominated by a massive, pulsating structure. It was organic yet mechanical, its surface gleaming with a dark, iridescent sheen. Tendrils of light stretched out from it, sinking into the ground, spreading like roots through the earth. Virex felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the heart of the jungle's resistance, the source of the signals that had turned the planet's creatures against them. He raised his weapon, his voice a low hiss over the calm. "Eyes on target. We move in slow, secure the area. Jorek, cover our flank. No mistakes." The team moved as one, their steps measured, precise. They circled the clearing, their weapons trained on the pulsating structure. Virex's mind raced. They needed to disable it, but without damaging it beyond use. He signaled 2 of his soldiers forward, watching as they set up the containment field, a shimmering barrier that would lock the structure in place. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The structure flared, its tendrils retracting, pulsing with a furious energy. The jungle around them seemed to come alive, vines and branches twisting, reaching toward them. "Fall back!" Virex shouted, firing at the writhing vegetation. "It knows we're here!" The team scrambled, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire and the crackling of energy. Virex's heart pounded as he watched the structure pulse and writhe, its surface rippling with colors. They were so close, too close to lose it now. "Hold the line!" he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need that target secured." His team rallied, their movements tight and controlled. They fired in bursts, their shots precise, holding back the encroaching jungle as the containment field snapped into place around the structure. The air hummed with tension, every moment a battle against the planet itself. Finally, the field stabilized, locking the structure in a shimmering cage of energy. The jungle fell still, the vines retreating, the clearing quiet once more. Virex took a deep breath, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. They had done it. The source of the jungle's power was contained, ready for extraction. He activated his comm, his voice steady. "Target secured. Preparing for extraction."